Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of March the 15th and 16th, 2025. And the main event this weekend is Mercury going retrograde. It comes to a standstill and then it starts moving backwards from the perspective of the Earth. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at this retrograde position and movement of Mercury, and I'll consider what it might mean. But before I look at Mercury retrograde in detail, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend of March the 15th and 16th. So here is the chart of the weekend set for midnight on Sunday, March the 16th. So this is the middle of the weekend, and it's set for New York as usual. Oh, by the way, if you happen to enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it, and if you're not subscribed, it would really make a difference if you were to subscribe. It does make a difference to the channel. So here is the chart for the weekend, and the moon is in Libra, and so that is a feature of the weekend. So we had sort of the moon in Virgo, sort of Thursday, Friday. We had the eclipse on Friday. Total eclipse, which was of course a Virgo eclipse, moon in Virgo, sun in Pisces. But now the moon has moved on and it's in Libra, and moon in Libra, moon is in an air sign, and that means that there is a certain emphasis on the mind in terms of what we say, and also moon in Libra strives for harmony, or at least it can do. Moon in Libra doesn't like things that are out of balance. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because Libra is the sign of the balances, and the moon in Libra is sort of making a grand trine. So there is, moon in Libra, got Jupiter in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. So especially on Saturday, when the moon is both making a trine to Jupiter, trine to Pluto. Okay, it's not an exact grand trine, but there may be a feeling of movement, and it might be a good time to be discussing things, talking about how things could be better. There will be a point over the weekend, on Saturday, when the moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. And Jupiter-Pluto is the principle of self-improvement. At least that's one positive interpretation of Jupiter and Pluto, wanting things to be better, and perhaps being quite fanatical about it, just not being happy with the status quo. And with the moon on a Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, one can really start to think about that and to really look at what one is doing and one's general situation, and however good it might be, take the view, it could be better, and one might want to strive in that direction. And so the moon, when it moves through Libra, it does make some aspects aside from that trine with Jupiter and Pluto. There is a trine to Jupiter. It does make some opposition aspects. Moon opposition Venus, moon opposition Mercury. So moon opposition Mercury can be about the struggle to communicate in the right way. So moon in Libra is about one's emotional response and what one wants to be, how one wants to feel. Moon in Libra does want to compromise, or at the very least wants to be reasonable. Then Mercury in Aries just likes to say exactly what's on its mind. So how does one say the right thing with Moon opposition Mercury? Emotionally, one doesn't want any strife, but one's mind is kind of going in a different way, and there might be a struggle there. Moon opposition Mercury could represent a conversation between two people. Moon in Libra and Mercury in Aries. One person is trying to preserve the harmony. The other person is maybe trying to upset it. And also Moon is opposition Venus. Moon opposition Venus at the beginning of a weekend could be a somewhat indulgent aspect, taking things too far, emotionally maybe, and in terms of what we're saying and the kind of feelings we express. But, Venus is in Aries, Moon is in Libra. I wouldn't have said that was an especially emotional opposition between Moon and Venus. I mean, all Moon-Venus oppositions have the potential for being emotional, but Libra playing Aries, maybe it's not going to be so extreme. Though Moon opposition Venus, be careful about indulgence at the beginning of a weekend, and maybe watch out for some over-expenditure, for example. And then the Moon makes a trine to Jupiter. I've already mentioned this trine to Jupiter in the context of the Moon being in this grand trine formation at the beginning of the weekend. But looking at the Moon trine Jupiter on its own, you could say that it's quite a fortunate aspect. Things move. We are optimistic, possibly more optimistic than we were on Friday. The immediate impact of the total eclipse of the Moon is passing, and so with Moon trine Jupiter, we may feel that we can be more optimistic. There are now more possibilities available to us, and then we move into Sunday, and there's not much going on astrologically, except for a square between the Moon and Mars. Moon in Libra squares Mars in Cancer, and there could be a bit of aggravation there, and someone believes they're right. And also on Sunday, you could say that there is a T-square if you count Chiron. So Moon opposition Chiron, Moon square Mars. It may be about feeling one does have to do things differently, and that's perhaps a clash. Moon in Libra wants to be calm and cool and not rock the boat, but then it's up against Chiron. And in this sense, I would see Chiron as the maverick rather than the wounded healer. So there's this tension between wanting peace, wanting harmony, but also wanting to be the maverick and wanting to be different. And can we resolve that contradiction? Well, maybe there is a way through. But the most important thing going on this weekend is the fact that Mercury is going retrograde. And this retrograde motion is something I will be talking about in detail later in the video. But when Mercury goes retrograde, it can be a time when things don't work as well as expected. And we might think that everything is fine and that everything is worked out and agreed, but then problems can happen. And of course, Mercury goes retrograde for 3 weeks. So you might say, if there was something you were planning on doing, especially in terms of communication or agreements or resolving something, and you haven't sorted it out by the weekend, you might say, well, maybe you need to wait 3 weeks. Wait until Mercury goes direct. And there is something else, another factor on Sunday, which could cause a few difficulties, is the fact that the Moon is moving into the Via Combusta. And Moon in the Via Combusta Okay, it's quite a regular event. Happens every month. It's Moon in a Vir combustor. It's that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, and so while the Moon is in a Vir combustor, things can just happen. Careful plans. We think we've sorted everything out, and then there are just events, or there's something we hadn't thought of. And so when you've got Moon in a Vir combustor and Mercury starting to go retrograde, and we're still, some of us at least, are recovering from the total eclipse of the Moon, things might go unexpectedly wrong, or at least awry. And this is not a time for having plans which are set in stone, because events might mean that we just have to change these plans at the last moment. And if these plans are too inflexible, can't deal with the unexpected, then these plans might be as good as useless. So that's the picture for New York, setting it for midnight on Saturday, Sunday. The picture for Sydney, Australia is similar, but you will see that Sydney, Australia, the Moon is just a little bit earlier. The Moon is at 8 degrees Libra. So, that means, for example, that the Moon won't move into the Vir combustor until quite late on Sunday. And also, if you're in Australasia, the emphasis of the weekend might be different. I think that in the Americas and even in Europe, even the main action in the weekend is going to be more Saturday than Sunday. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then possibly Sunday is going to be a busier day than Saturday, because look at the Moon Jupiter trine. So that Moon Jupiter trine will become exact sort of Sunday morning. That Moon Jupiter trine would have been exact definitely on Saturday if you were in the Americas. So there is a bit of a difference, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this weekend the Moon is solidly in Libra, and also this weekend Mercury goes retrograde. So let's turn to the heliocentric chart. So this is a heliocentric chart where we put the Sun at the center of the solar system, and the Earth is still making a lot of aspects. So we talked about this T-square involving Earth opposition Saturn, Earth square Jupiter. It's still there, hasn't gone away. You can see that the Earth is actually now on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. It's sort of halfway between making the opposition of Saturn and the opposition of Neptune. And the Earth is still pretty close to the square of Jupiter. And some of these aspects we can see in the geocentric chart. We know that the Sun is conjunct Saturn, Sun is conjunct Neptune. So the Earth is, of course, always opposition the Sun, by definition. And so this heliocentric chart reminds us, of the pressures we're under. And it's not just the Earth. You could say, look, Venus is coming in. So Venus is opposition Saturn. Earth is opposition Neptune. This T-square is quite a powerful formation. And I would have said that from a heliocentric perspective, we might experience quite a tense weekend, or at least the world might experience a tense weekend, because when you're looking at the heliocentric chart, it is more collective than personal. I think on a personal level, we can maybe avoid the heliocentric chart. Not always, but it's just not so influential. But when you're talking about the Earth, the world at large, then the heliocentric chart is reminding us that things are tense. Of course, we've got these negotiations in Ukraine. I'm sure there are political tensions in the US. Whatever country you live in, nothing is great. I mean, people always think that their country where they live is the worst country in the world, but there's always a country that's in a worse state than one's own, and there is a certain focus on the economy, always, and especially as we have Mercury going retrograde very close to a full moon eclipse. When you do get those two events coinciding, which I think they do this time round, that can cause a fair amount of turmoil. It can represent sort of unstable markets. And of course, Jupiter-Saturn in this chart, I know the markets are closed over the weekend, but that Jupiter-Saturn square heliocentrically, it's still very much in force, and it's been picked up by the Earth and Venus, and now we've got Neptune involved. So it's difficult to know what's going on, and I think that there is a certain amount of fear around. That would be Earth on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, opposition to Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So try not to take things too personally, and just realize that these cycles just have to happen. It's just the way it goes. And so that's the heliocentric picture. And now I want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of March the 15th and 16th, 2025. Aries. Aries, moon is now solidly in Libra. Libra is, of course, your opposite sign, and that does mean that over the weekend you do have to take into account other people and consider their influence on you, and that may not be such a bad thing. You've got over the total eclipse of a moon, and the total eclipse of a moon might in some respects have been a little bit tedious. There were things you needed to sort out. Perhaps you would have been better off if you could sort these things out on your own. And now that the moon's in Libra, you feel a little more relaxed, but also you have to consider what other people are doing, what other people want. And that moon in Libra does make oppositions to Mercury and Venus, and those oppositions could be particularly strong on Saturday, and so that could represent disagreements or the potential for disagreements. There are things you want to do and you want to express yourself in a particular way. Mercury and Venus in your sign, and you're trying to be reasonable about it, but at the same time you have standards and you don't really want to compromise too much, yet the moon in Libra is asking you to compromise, or at least to include other people in your plans. And that's important. When we talk about plans, we immediately think, hold on, plans. Mercury is going retrograde. Mercury is going retrograde in Aries, in your sign, and your desire to make things happen is going to be constrained by outside factors. Now, it's often said with Mercury retrograde that you shouldn't make plans when Mercury is retrograde, or at least when Mercury starts to go retrograde. Well, sometimes we have to make plans, and there's no reason why you can't. But if you are making plans, as Mercury and Aries might want to do, then you have to consider other people. That would be Mercury and Aries opposition the moon in Libra. If you don't consider other people, and if you don't consider what other people are capable of doing, then your plans might come to nothing and you just might get really annoyed. And it's not just the fact that the moon is moving into Libra, or opposite sign. By Sunday, the moon is actually in the Via Combusta, the flaming path. And when the moon is in Via Combusta, especially when Mercury is also retrograde, you just can't expect people to behave as you thought they would. So, Aries, do be careful, and do not make assumptions about other people, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't have an influence. You certainly can. If you want to get your way, and I believe you can get your way, you just have to make a special effort to understand what makes other people tick. And that might require some thought. And you have to observe other people. You have to make an effort to consider where they are at a particular moment. So you can be manipulative and you can get your way, but you have to be, this weekend, you have to be very, very subtle. And subtlety is not going to come easily to you, but it's certainly possible. And I should say that in general, Aries, if you think about it, you're just going to be very aware that everything is carefully balanced. Everything is just about in the right place, but if you move one thing, you move another thing, and something else moves, and the whole edifice might collapse. So tread carefully, more carefully than you'd like to. But if you take a cautious approach and you understand other people's complexities, then the weekend should be okay. Taurus, you might feel that certain things are difficult to manage, especially in their original and raw form. And if you just accept things as they are, it may just be that you are not going to make a great deal of progress. So Taurus, you have to make sure that everything is in order at a time when it is actually very difficult to create order, because this weekend Mercury is going retrograde, and so with Mercury going retrograde, all sorts of things can happen that you maybe hadn't planned for, and these happenings can actually take place in your own mind. You might find yourself worrying about something that you hadn't worried about before. There could be some secret fear that suddenly manifests. And if it's a secret fear, that doesn't necessarily mean it comes to much. It just may be a figment of your imagination, but your imagination could actually be very powerful. And we might then be into the possibility that your own private thoughts and feelings, which may be completely irrational, may disturb the flow of your life. So you're trying to sort things out, you're trying to arrange things, but it's difficult to be calm because your mind and your feelings are going into overdrive. So if you do find yourself having sudden fears and worries, what if it goes wrong? What if this were to happen? If you do find yourself having those kind of thoughts, in most cases, you need to be a little relaxed and not jump to conclusions. And this is a time when many Taurians are starting to feel a little bit under pressure, and your thoughts might be drifting to the worst possible scenario. And if you're worrying about the worst possible scenario, you might overreact, and that's certainly a danger. You're aware of, or you think you're aware of, a great limitation or even a great danger. You think you're aware of it and you have to do something. But whatever you do, whatever you decide to do, especially if it is dramatic, there's a very good chance you make things worse. And it might be a situation, Taurus, where if you just leave things alone, everything is going to be fine. But as soon as you meddle, as soon as you ask questions, as soon as you start lifting rocks, I mean lifting rocks in terms of trying to see what's under them, at least in a symbolic sense. You don't know what's under that rock. You probably don't want to know what's under that rock. But as soon as you start asking those questions, as soon as you start disturbing the calm, there is a danger here that you create self-fulfilling prophecies. And it might be a case this weekend that ignorance is bliss. And I'm not generally of the view that ignorance is bliss, me being a curious Gemini. Well, I do have a Taurus rising, so to an extent I may be talking to myself. And I certainly have loads of irrational fears. I don't discuss my irrational fears, but if you went inside my mind, it's a complete mess of worries and fears. It always has been the case. So overall, Libra, just try to be calm. Try to get a perspective on your worries, because I just do think that some of your worries are not reasonable, and your job is just to sort things out, get things together. And if we're talking about the unexpected, something unexpected happening which knocks you off course, that unexpected may not be an external event. It might be just you having a thought, and that thought could just make you do things which completely mess things up, but it's unnecessary. So Taurus, it just may be a question of just keep calm, carry on, and don't be distracted by any passing irrational fear. Gemini, big event is, of course, Mercury going retrograde. And Mercury goes retrograde this weekend. That is for sure. And Mercury is your ruler. So when Mercury goes retrograde, Geminis can really pick up on that. And you might have to pause. It may be the case that there were certain things that you were really keen on. You wanted to proceed with them. And right now, if you were to execute your plans as expected, in the way you had expected, for one reason or another, they might not work out. And this is not just about this weekend, because Mercury does go retrograde for the next 3 weeks, and I'll be talking in detail about Mercury going retrograde later in this video. So do consider what your plans are for the next 3 weeks, and this weekend probably try to be as independent as possible. I think that if you do things your way and you don't involve outside forces, outside people, then probably things are going to be absolutely fine. You might not even feel Mercury going retrograde. I mean, look at Saturday. Saturday we've got Moon trine Jupiter. Moon trine Jupiter is a terrific aspect, especially if you're a Gemini, because Jupiter's in Gemini. The Moon is making a trine to Jupiter in Gemini. So you can really be yourself. You can have fun. You can do things that you're good at. And additionally, the Moon is trine Pluto. Certainly on Saturday, early on Saturday, Moon is trine Pluto. So you've got Moon trine Pluto, Moon trine Jupiter. So on Saturday, things are moving, and you can push yourself. And you don't have to be satisfied with the way things are. Things can be better and better and better, provided you don't involve other people, provided you don't worry too much about other people's interference, because people can be really annoying, especially with Mercury going retrograde. And so if you are in a situation where you spend a lot of time socializing, you feel you want to give people your time, you have social arrangements, you involve other people in your activities, then things might go wrong. You might be disappointed, or worse still, you might be pushed in the wrong direction. And in this light, it's not a good idea to change your plans as a result of external pressure, and it's not a good idea to be tempted, because Mercury does it goes stationary retrograde in quite a sociable part of your chart, and it's difficult not to consider what other people are doing and what other people are saying and what other people are suggesting. And if you move into other people's world, into other people's way of thinking, then you might make mistakes. And you could make mistakes if you do anything which is kind of off the beaten track, or if you're tempted to leave the path. Once you're tempted to leave the path, anything can happen. And this weekend, if you have any ideas, it's great to have ideas. Enjoy your ideas, have fun with your ideas, but don't necessarily act on your ideas. They may be ideas which are fundamentally flawed, and that doesn't mean you should disregard them, but you should just sit on them. And over the next few weeks, you can work out whether they're actually viable. Though some Geminis, certainly not all Geminis, might regard this weekend as having a strangely spiritual dimension, and you have a feeling that you're meant to be doing something, that something is urging you in a particular direction, and maybe it's something supernatural, something beyond yourself. And that's interesting, but again, don't jump to conclusions. You could be kidding yourself. It could just be your unconscious chattering away. But consider it, bear it in mind over the next few weeks. And returning to that moon trine Jupiter on Saturday, I must emphasize it is a good aspect, and it is an aspect. It's not necessarily just about creativity and doing something you enjoy. It can be about other people. It can be about relationships. But the kind of relationship that is light and easy, where there aren't any commitments. It just may be you and another person enjoying yourself on Saturday, having fun. In certain cases, the Moon-Jupiter trine can have a romantic dimension, but I certainly don't want to make any promises there, and it may not be appropriate. But do take advantage of Moon trine Jupiter on Saturday, even though on Saturday Mercury is going stationary retrograde. But don't worry about Mercury going retrograde. It does happen pretty regularly, and for Gemini's, Mercury going retrograde is just a chance for you to reconsider things. It means you don't have to do anything, and you have another chance to look at things and maybe reach a different conclusion. Cancer, the moon is solidly in Libra this weekend, and you might regard that as being a signal to look after yourself. I mean, why not? Actually, Cancerians are quite good at looking after themselves. I mean, you think about the symbol of the crab. It's got its shell. It understands its priorities. It's quite a self-protective animal, the crab, and you have to make sure that you are as secure as possible with the moon in Libra. So this weekend, you might feel that really there's nothing that absolutely has to be done, certainly in a social sense, and the real action, if there is any action, may be about you and what you want to do with your time. And on Saturday, we do arguably have a grand trine in air signs. So you've got Moon in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini, and that's trine Pluto in Aquarius. And you might then be thinking with this grand trine, especially on Saturday, although that Moon trine Jupiter is actually exact on Sunday if you're in Australia or New Zealand, certainly. But this grand trine, you may look at yourself and you may be thinking, well, things are great, things are fine, but they could be better. And you may be looking at what you've recently achieved, and again, you may have achieved a lot, but as far as you're concerned, you could have achieved more. I don't think you're going to be 100% satisfied with yourself certainly on Saturday, and that's probably a good thing, because it's going to encourage you to push things further. So when you look back on the week, and what you've done and what you haven't done over the week, then on Saturday you might think, well, you have got to make up for lost time, and you can do that in your own way. I don't think that you're going to need anyone's help. That doesn't mean to say, though, that there won't be outside pressure. The Moon in Libra does make opposition aspects to Venus and Mercury. Now, how those opposition aspects work out kind of depends on the situation. It might be pressure from the outside to do something you don't really want to do. And that would be especially the case if you were working on Saturday, or you are very sociable, you are trying to organize things, and you have to consider what other people are saying. And so if those lines of communication are open and people want things from you, then yeah, that's how the Moon opposition Venus Moon opposition Mercury could be working out. And the question is, how do you respond? And with the Moon in Libra, Cancer, what you're looking for is just a sense of balance. I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? Moon in Libra, you want balance. What is upsetting that balance? Moon opposition Venus, Moon opposition Mercury. Someone making demands on your time. And the question is, are you able to give in to those demands? You clearly should not give in to those demands, but the Moon is in Libra. You're trying to be reasonable. But the trouble is with Moon in Libra, if you give a little bit away, you might give quite a lot away. And in the end, you could really compromise yourself, and you could undermine your own happiness. So it might be best, Cancer, if you just you hold firm, whatever that means to you in your particular situation. Also worth pointing out that the Moon is opposition Chiron, and it's a Moon in Libra, opposition Chiron in Aries. And in fact, the Moon is making a square to Mars and an opposition to Chiron. And that presents us with something else. Maybe that T-square is optional, but it's a very individualistic. And, especially when you're under pressure, you're going to really show the world who you are, and that you are someone different. And that can be a surprise. Cancer has a certain reputation for being kind of cautious, not rocking the boat, maybe. Not quite sure why, but there is that certain reputation that Cancer is a safe pair of hands. But Moon opposition Chiron with Mars on the T might indicate a situation where you surprise people with your individualism. You are going to do things your way, and you are going to fight to do things your way. And you don't mind about being different. Yeah, because this weekend you are an individual, and as I said, that's especially the case if you're under pressure. So the question is, Cancer, do you want to get involved in that pressure? Because the way you respond to pressure is going to be quite dramatic. And so it might be better if you, or certainly easier, if you put yourself in a situation where there is no pressure, where you don't listen to what other people are saying or suggesting, and you don't sort of rise to the bait. But maybe there is an element of choice there. Leo, I think that actually it may be quite a good weekend. I mean, I know that Mercury is going retrograde and the moon is moving into a Via Combuster. Certainly on Sunday the moon is in a Via Combuster. But I think that from your perspective, you're feeling quite optimistic. You believe that many different things are possible, and you try to think the best of other people, and you believe that if something is possible, then you may actually be able to really make it happen. And I wouldn't discount your optimism. If you're feeling optimistic, and if you feel that something really can be made a success of, then I would trust your feelings. You've worked it out at some level. That doesn't mean to say that your plan is 100% perfect, and perhaps it's a plan one has to consider. The moon is in the Via Combuster, so when the moon is in the Via Combuster, well, the moon is in the Via Combuster on Sunday as it moves into the last half of Libra, and it does stay in the Via Combuster for a couple of days. So with the moon in the Via Combuster, you certainly have to make sure that you do have a certain amount of flexibility. If you are inflexibly optimistic, you take the view that you can be successful, that you can have a single plan for doing it, and you don't make allowances for external events. Okay, then that could be a problem. But if you're reasonable, then your ideas for the future, even the immediate future, can actually work out. And I don't think that Mercury going retrograde should be too much of a problem. And also, I think that other people are going to pick up on your optimism. You have to remember, this weekend for many people is going to be difficult. We've looked at, for example, the heliocentric chart. So heliocentrically, we have the Earth opposition Saturn, opposition Neptune. And a lot of people are worried about things, and Mercury going retrograde, moon in the Via Combuster doesn't really help, does it? But you can see through it all, and there is always with Sun in Leo, at least Sun in Leo. I think with Leo rising as well, and indeed moon in Leo. That does depend what you're coming into this reading with, or rather, why you're looking at Leo. Are you looking at Leo because of your ascendant or your sun, or because of your moon? Certainly, if you're coming in because of your sun, then of course Sun in Leo works extremely well. Sun is in its own sign. But even if you're coming in with your moon or your ascendant in Leo, then there is a sunny optimism to you somewhere, and that sunny optimism can be supported this weekend. Even if other people are feeling a little bit negative, and you can see the way through. And this is also shown in the way you express yourself, and self-expression really does matter, and the way you express yourself is quite uplifting, especially on Saturday, because on Saturday we've got moon trine Jupiter, and moon trine Jupiter is just an optimistic way of seeing the world, and also being able to deal with friends, associates, other people in a sort of happy-go-lucky way. And people are just going to like your approach. You are a breath of fresh air. So, do make the most of it. Yeah, especially on Saturday. Sunday, there may not be quite so much action, and there may be a little bit of resistance. If plans do go wrong, they're more likely to go wrong on a Sunday, but I don't think that's necessary, provided you have a reasonable approach, and if someone disagrees with you, don't take it to heart. You may be able to find a way of accommodating disagreements. So, of all the 12 signs, we might say that Leo is going to have the best time, all things being equal. With these 12 sign forecasts, there's always an element of generalization. I can't see your whole chart, but overall, if I had to give you a star rating for this weekend, certainly in a relative sense, I would give Leo's 5 stars out of 5. Virgo. As you probably know, Mercury is going retrograde, and if you're a Virgo, that does matter, because Mercury is your ruler, and so with your ruler going retrograde, you might feel that things aren't working as well as they should. You thought that things were going to be easy or easier, and it just may not turn out to plan. And there may be just things you have to deal with which you didn't want to deal with, but you're having to do it anyway. So when you look at this weekend, as you move into this weekend, it's important not to have fixed ideas about how things can work out, how things are going to work out. And you must be ready to deal with things which you didn't really want to deal with. And that might relate to money, because with the moon in Libra, in the financial sector of your chart, moon in Libra making an opposition to Venus and Mercury, that's going to be on Saturday by and large. So on Saturday in particular, there just could be issues relating to money. People might not agree with you when it comes to money. And even if other people are not involved, if you start to look at money, consider what money is about, you might realize things, and you'll see that things are more complicated than you'd realized. And with Mercury going retrograde, you might be thinking that some of your ideas about money, and not just about money itself, but all of the complications surrounding money, agreements, fears, all of that starts to come into focus, and you realize that things are more complicated than you thought. And it may just take a little bit of time to get to grips with these complications. Indeed, it may take 3 weeks, because Mercury is going to start going retrograde soon. Okay, maybe not 3 weeks, certainly until the rest of a month. While Mercury is in Aries, Mercury does actually go out of Aries. I think it's on March the 30th. So in a couple of weeks' time, when Mercury leaves Aries, goes back into Pisces, some of the financial focus might dissipate. But the financial arena does have to be taken seriously. And additionally, this weekend we have an aspect between Moon and Mars. Moon in Libra square Mars in Cancer, and certain people may be irritating, and their attitude to money may be irritating. What people say about money could be annoying. And so part of the question you might have this weekend is how much do you focus on money? You could just say that you don't want to bother with money. You just want to ignore anything connected with money. And that certainly gives you a more relaxing weekend, but if you address money head on, even if it's not the first thing that comes to mind, then it might be quietly satisfying. And maybe that's particularly the case in the United States, because the United States, it's I think there's a month left before the first tax deadline. You've got to get your form in by you've got to submit your tax return by I think it's April the 15th. So if you haven't worked on your taxes yet, this weekend might actually be a good time to do it. And one reason it might be a good time to do it is because, with Mercury going retrograde, it might take longer than expected. So if you thought that it was going to take a day to do your taxes, it may take 3 weeks, or maybe you'll be waiting for some document. You might have everything, or you think you've got everything, but you haven't got something, and it just may take time to get it together. And this probably applies to everyone, because if you're in the United States, that is. But don't forget the fact that Mercury is retrograde. That could affect the tax season. So I'm sorry to be rather boring, but I thought I had to mention that. And also this weekend, Virgo, don't get distracted, and don't get sudden ideas about doing things. They might sound interesting and exciting, but there's some danger that Virgos get involved with something over the weekend that might be a little bit regrettable. Perhaps it's about curiosity. You wanted to know about something. You perhaps wanted to go somewhere, or involve yourself in some activity which seemed harmless, but when you actually do it, it could represent unique challenges, and some of those challenges are just completely unnecessary and do involve anything that is underhand, sleazy, obviously criminal. Anything like that should be avoided, because there might be a certain temptation in that direction. On the other hand, you might just want to put your energy into finding out about real crime. That might interest you, so reading a crime novel, or being more concerned about crime and sleaze in terms of what you're watching, YouTube videos. That might be of interest to you, but I suppose that's going to be fairly harmless, isn't it? So that's the weekend. It's a somewhat complicated weekend, and you do need to take things seriously, but you're a Virgo. I think you can handle it. Libra, moon is in your sign, and it's in your sign all weekend long, and that's a good thing. It's nice having a moon in Libra. You're feeling sort of quite balanced. Obviously, Libra is a balance, and you're able to relate to the world around you, at least to begin with, and especially if you don't have to worry too much about what other people are doing. But as soon as you involve other people, there is the potential for things to maybe become a little more complicated. And the reason for that is because the moon is making an opposition to Venus, and it's making an opposition to Mercury. And so on Saturday, when those oppositions are exact, you possibly need to be wary. Do you actually need to spend a lot of time with other people on Saturday? Are relationships important to you? Especially those one-to-one relationships which take up a lot of your time. Is this what you really want? Because as soon as you introduce another person to your life, at whatever level, they upset the balance. You have to rebalance things, and what you don't want to want, Libra, is to be in a situation where you are having to sort of constantly rebalance, because that is not going to make you happy. And it may be just difficult for you to get anything done, get anything together, and you just might feel concerned and worried. Librans like to do things right. They like to appear in the right way, and they are worried about impressions, or at least they can be worried about impressions. And so, where possible, you should avoid complications. And don't forget that Mercury is retrograde. Mercury is turning retrograde, and so that means with Mercury retrograde, you can't necessarily trust what anyone says or does or promises. They might be very sure of themselves at the time, but almost the moment they've said the words, "I promise, I will do that, I commit to this," at the moment that happens, things change, and you might find that people break their promises. So don't accept what anyone says at face value, because the situation might change. And also, Libra, it's important that you do think about yourself. And one aspect we have this weekend is Moon square Mars. And Moon square Mars does have a problem reputation. It can be about people getting angry. But for you, this Moon square Mars could actually be quite dynamic. And you might find this weekend that you can cover a lot of ground if you are very focused and you ignore the fact that Mercury is going stationary direct. And that might just mean ignoring other people. You don't let other people have too much of an influence on you. You make the decisions. You decide what you want to do. And if you actually throw a lot of energy into something that's really important to you, even though the odds might appear to be stacked against you, then I think you can really do something quite amazing with that Moon square Mars. And although that Moon square Mars is going to be exact for only a couple of hours, there's still that general feel of Moon in Libra, Mars in Cancer. There's that dynamic relationship between those two bodies. And it seems that even when things don't entirely go to plan, you're going to be able to run with it. You're just going to be able to take your energy and just transfer it and not get knocked off balance. And maybe one reason why you can be successful this weekend is that you'll have a certain grim determination to you. You'll realize that the world is difficult. Nothing can be guaranteed. Now that might not sound typically Libran, it might sound more like a Scorpio, but you have a toughness this weekend, which actually might be quite slightly uncharacteristic of your sign. And with that grim determination, Libra, I do think that it can actually be a very successful weekend, though it might not be a fun weekend. Yeah, it certainly can be successful. Also, by the way, you're helped by the fact that the Moon is trine Jupiter. Moon trine Jupiter on Saturday, that's a very lucky aspect. And so even if things are difficult, something is looking after you and will make sure that you can see things through to a successful conclusion. Scorpio, you may feel that you don't have to say it. Whatever it is, you can keep quiet about it. And as far as you're concerned, that might be the best approach and the safest approach. Why risk a conflict? Certain things should maybe be kept to yourself. And if you're open and honest, what actually are you letting yourself in for? The Moon is making an opposition to Venus. It's making an opposition to Mercury. That moon opposition Venus, moon opposition Mercury represents all the kind of things that Scorpio doesn't really want to have to bother with. Having to deal with the complexities of the outside world, with the complexities of human nature. The fact that people can be contrary, they can tell you one thing one moment, something else the other moment, the next moment, and sort of, why bother? You don't need to bother with it. You don't need that kind of aggravation. And, you've got your own questions, you've got your own quests. The moon is making a square to Mars, and that moon square Mars may be quite helpful, provided you're working on things constructively on your own. And what you might actually be looking for could be just a broader sense of meaning. I mean, that has been a theme while Mars has been in Cancer, thinking about what everything is all about and putting your actions into some broader, even spiritual context. And that's something you should be working on. It's not always easy. And there may be some existential questions that Scorpios are asking themselves over the weekend. Yeah, what is the purpose of this? What is even the purpose of certain other people? Do you need to have them in your life, for example? And while I am suggesting that you don't need to be socially active, that doesn't mean that you don't have any influence. If you want to, Scorpio, you can actually have a considerable influence. So if you find yourself forced to engage with the complexities of human nature, you'll do a good job. You'll make your feelings very clear, and one way or another people will listen to you. You'll have to be subtle about it, but Scorpios are good at being subtle, and so your influence can slowly but surely make itself felt. And if you ever get annoyed this weekend, if you do find yourself getting annoyed this weekend, as I think you might with the moon opposition Venus, moon opposition Mercury, in fact moon opposition Chiron as well, the answer is to just get some perspective. And that's what you're trying to do at the moment. Get some perspective. What does it mean? How important is it? And in many cases, something that annoys you, some action that annoys you, may be nothing. It just might be like an insect sting. It's nothing really to worry about. Okay, I know that insect stings can lead to catastrophic events if one wants to be completely literal about it, but I'm talking about standard insect stings, just things buzzing around you, biting, annoying you. That's how you should perceive it. And don't take anything to heart. Don't personalize things, and really try to be at a distance. Don't feel you have to touch. Don't feel that you have to be involved, and maybe even just float just slightly over the surface. And that way you can deal with the weekend's challenges. And yes, Mercury is going retrograde. Yes, the moon is moving into the Via Combusta. That may say something about the fundamental unreliability of the world in which you're living. But it's not your unreliability. It only becomes an issue if you start to really engage with things and take people seriously and assume that their promises can be 100% relied on. But if you can have this weekend at a slight distance, then things should be okay. Sagittarius, try not to have too many expectations over the course of the weekend. Things may be a little bit slow. It's not that you're slow. It just may be that the world is slow and people don't want to change. They're stuck in their ways, and there may be a sense that things are stagnating. I think I've already used this word stagnation a day or two ago when I was doing your horoscope. That feeling of stagnation is still around, and you could say that it's intensified now that Mercury is going stationary direct. So that Mercury going stationary direct doesn't impact you directly, I don't think, but it does say something about other people you thought could be relied on, because some people might have a change of mind, and they might not do what they had said they'd do, and that could be an irritation, especially this weekend, because in many respects, Sagittarius, you are quite socially orientated. You would like to spend time with other people, enjoy their company, but you might be disappointed by the reality of what they say, how they behave. It may be disappointing, and you just might have just a feeling of the same old. You see people, you look at people, and they're just doing the same thing, what they were doing last week, last month, last year, last decade. People don't change, and that might bother you, and you might find it somewhat frustrating. And you can try your hardest to make things better, to create a change of scene. And one's reminded also of the heliocentric picture. So the beginning of this video, I looked at the heliocentric chart, and so what we have heliocentrically is that we've got Saturn opposition, you've got Saturn moving towards a conjunction of Neptune, and the Earth is opposition Saturn and Neptune, and then you've got Jupiter on the T, and that might represent you. And Saturn opposition the Earth, Earth opposition to Neptune, that just shows how difficult things are. Again, it's not about you personally, but it's just the world in which we're living. It's about society. And then there's you, Jupiter, trying to work things out, trying to make things better, trying to make sense of other people's negativity. And you can make some progress, but you should not expect immediate progress. And so if there are any problems this weekend, it's just important not to personalize them, not to think that it's anything to do with you. It's just the world in which we're living. And I think that was shown by the heliocentric chart. But on a positive note, it's important to be positive, this weekend the moon is not just in Libra, but the moon is actually making a trine to Jupiter. And that moon trine Jupiter does indicate that you're going to be able to get through to at least one person. Not everyone is going to listen to you. They just can't listen to you because they're so set in their ways. But some people will listen, and you can get through to them. So if anyone really is worth bothering with, there is a way with that moon trine Jupiter. And it may just be with Jupiter and Gemini that you have to make a really special effort to understand another person's viewpoint, why someone is not moving, why they have the attitudes they have. And if you're prepared to make that effort with that moon trine Jupiter, it seems that there is a real possibility that you can get through to them. And if you can get through to them, I think that would be really worth it in terms of the improvement in one particular relationship. Capricorn, you feel a certain sense of responsibility this weekend. It's a weekend where you know that there are things that have to be done. Maybe they won't wait. And you're going to be trying your best. Is it going to be against the odds? Well, it could be. I mean, it's a difficult weekend for everyone because Mercury is going stationary retrograde. And when Mercury is going stationary retrograde, it may actually be quite difficult to get things done, and it may be difficult to actually know what's going on. There's a lot of things are being said, a lot of mixed messages, and people are not going to be reliable. So if you are trying to get anything done this weekend, then don't put yourself in a position where it can be messed up by external factors, external events, other people, whatever. It has to be a position where you are totally self-reliant. That could be tough because the moon does make an opposition to Mercury and Venus, and that might represent serious distractions. Those distractions could come from people you know, it could come from your own family, and certain members of your family may be a little bit indecisive today, and they may say they're going to do one thing and they may want to do something else, and so you have to be quite firm if you want to have a predictable weekend, a weekend where you know what you want to achieve, you just go and do it, and nothing gets in your way. Also, the moon is making a square to Mars, and that moon square Mars could very well have an impact on Capricorns. Moon is in an angular sign from a Capricorn perspective. It's also making a square to Mars. Again, Mars in Cancer, angular sign. So you give people a chance to irritate you, and they'll certainly irritate you. And that's another reason why you should put yourself in a position where you cannot be knocked off track by another person's random behavior, random words. So give yourself a lot of space, and try not to be too trusting. And if you do come across real obstacles this weekend, what can actually see you through is this broader vision. And this vision is something I've been talking about, on and off over the last week or two in reference to Capricorns. And if you just get a broad sense of where you'd like to be going, and indeed where everyone else should be going, could be going, you have that broad sense, and whatever the short-term instability, it shouldn't matter. That vision remains intact, and that can help see you through the weekend and can perhaps have an influence on other people. If you just refuse to be fazed, you refuse to be distracted, people might in the end realize that you're serious. Indeed, the universe might realize you're serious. And once everyone realizes you're serious, then the sky's the limit. Aquarius. Aquarius, we kind of have a grand trine in air signs. We've got Moon in Libra, and it's trine Pluto right at the beginning of a weekend, and it's trine Jupiter, especially on Saturday, this grand trine in air signs. And this grand trine in air signs really helps moves things along. Even though Mercury is stationary retrograde, you shouldn't worry about it too much. There are things you can do, and you can create action, and there's something about you that's just energetic, especially on a mental level. And so you make the most of your ideas, and also don't be lazy or complacent. This moon square Jupiter, moon square Pluto, moon trine Jupiter, moon trine Pluto, can be about making things better, especially at that moment when the moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, which will happen on Saturday. And so you don't have to be satisfied with things as they are. And as you move into the weekend, you can take action to make things better and to make things also more meaningful. If something doesn't have a meaning to you, then it could actually be very temporary. You might in the end just give up on it. What's the point? Because if something doesn't have a meaning, then its lifespan, as far as you're concerned, may be very limited. But you can actually find the meaning and purpose in terms of your actions and also in terms of your aspirations. And once that happens, it's going to be very difficult for it to be knocked. And one thing though that can really be very dispiriting is too much talking. And I'm saying that because the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and I don't think that moon opposition Mercury for you is especially useful. For example, there may be something that's really important to you, and you may want to explain it. And the mere act of explaining it could destroy it. Or at least not, if not destroy it, then weaken it, make it more trivial, make it more temporary. So things that matter should not really be discussed. And that's not because you're being secretive. It's because you're trying to get a broader perspective, and you're trying to give things meaning, and it can take time for things to get real meaning. And so if something really matters to you, it just may take a few weeks until maybe Mercury goes direct in 3 weeks' time. Maybe then you can start to talk about things. But words can be very destructive, and they can trivialize things, and they can, in the end, in a worst case scenario, you can just sort of lose your sense of meaning. So keep that meaning, and always look for something which goes beyond the way you are. That is that moon Jupiter Pluto grand trine. It's about making things better. It's about working hard on something. It's about making something special. And very often that can be a solo process, but that's okay. You don't need outside help. You don't need outside stimuli. You've got everything you need right now. So it can be a great weekend, but you've just got to keep that sense of perspective and not allow yourself to trivialize things through empty conversation. Pisces, you may feel that things are a little bit stuck over the weekend. Things aren't moving as fast as you'd like them to, and also you may be somewhat disappointed by other people. They just won't give you what you're looking for, and their attitudes may be really stuck. They're just not moving, and you therefore should consider other alternatives. Don't have a weekend that's too reliant on any one particular person, because that could be a spoilt weekend, especially as we have Mercury going stationary retrograde. So Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, which is the opposite sign to Pisces. So when Mercury is stationary retrograde, you might find that just people are not being very decisive. They could change their mind, and they could in fact be completely unhelpful. And if you try to change their mind, or you try to encourage them, then your efforts may not be reciprocated, and that's just going to make things difficult. So that means, Pisces, that as far as possible, you should do things your way and realize that you're the one who's got all the answers, and there's a lot you understand, and there are more things you can understand, and this can take place over the weekend. As the weekend progresses, you can get powerful insights. These insights may not always be pleasant, but what is wrong with the truth? There's nothing wrong with the truth at all, and the truth is completely available to you. And this may relate back to the full moon eclipse. So we had that full moon eclipse on Thursday, Friday. For most of us, I think that would have been on Friday. And though when I saw the eclipse, it was late on Thursday because I'm in Washington State. So for me, it was really on Thursday. But for most of us, I think it was on Friday. But that eclipse was right across the main axis of your chart. You had Moon in Virgo, Sun in Pisces, and that did start to show you the truth of the matter. And the eclipse might have passed, but the realization has not passed, and it's still very much with you, and it's still very much with you this weekend. And as the moon moves into Libra, because the eclipse happened when the moon was in Virgo, but as the moon changes sign, moves into Libra, it just may be a time where you need to sort of incorporate what has happened, because a lot is happening. We've just had this eclipse. Mercury is going stationary direct. By Sunday, the moon will be in the Via Combustor. So these could be quite difficult times. Again, not for you personally, just for everyone. And there's just a lot for you to take on board. And you might think that it's your responsibility to sort things out, to make things better. And we could see that potential for responsibility if we looked at the heliocentric chart. So when I looked at the heliocentric chart, I pointed out that the Earth is opposition Saturn, Earth is opposition Neptune, and Jupiter is on the T. Jupiter is, of course, your ruler. And so you might feel that it's your responsibility to deal with really quite heavy concepts, heavy, even global concepts, and try to make things better. Now, that is an optional task. That's not something you have to do. You could try your hand at it, and if anyone can sort it out, then it's probably you. And maybe you can transmit information to other people in such a way that they actually understand what's going on. But it's going to be hard work. People are not receptive to much at the moment. And you're the one who has the knowledge in a way. So that is perhaps a good thing about this weekend. You do have a certain superiority over a lot of other people. And I don't say that to make you feel arrogant or to think you're better than anyone, but it's just you've got the knowledge and you just have the understanding, and it may be also to do with the fact that there's this Sun-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. That's a serious influence, and it makes you realize that things are serious, and if anyone gets it, it's you. And that might give you a certain sense of responsibility, and how you use that responsibility and what you feel you need to do is to a great extent up to you. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 21, which is biting through. And I do think that this hexagram biting through does reflect what's going on astrologically. Astrologically, we've got Mercury going retrograde, and when I was going through the 12 signs, I was warning you maybe, that other people could be a problem, and other people might not have the same perceptions as us. They might not realize what's going on, and biting through is a hexagram which is about punishment, and it's about dealing with people who are really quite intransigent. They won't be told, and we may be dealing with really stubborn elements. And the question is, how do we deal with it? And I looked at several sources with this biting through, and there are different viewpoints. One view might be that we're dealing with a difficult situation with biting through, but it may not be quite as difficult as it seems, and we just have to make sure that we don't overdo it. In terms of administering punishment, when I say punishment, I'm not talking about literal punishment. I don't think you're a judge, or maybe you are. Maybe you're sitting over the weekend, but I think in most cases it's about admonishing people, or withdrawing something, or withdrawing support, or showing one's displeasure. That might be what biting through is about. And one view is one doesn't have to use too much energy. It may be actually relatively easy to get people to understand the truth of the matter and to mend their ways. And that would be an approach. But then another way of looking at it is that we're dealing with people. Remember, Mercury's just going retrograde, and it stays retrograde for 3 weeks, and that could represent a person who is just not going to listen to reason. And maybe one reason for not being too critical of someone is because they're not going to listen. We know they're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong. We could try our hardest this weekend to make an impression, but it's just possible that actually nothing happens. And so at the very least, this hexagram is just a reminder that certain people are not behaving correctly, and ideally something needs to be done about it. But the question is, can we do anything about it? And it depends on the situation, but don't underestimate other people's stubbornness. And we do have a moving line, and I have been talking about this moving line. The second line moves, and there's a certain difference of opinion, I think, about what that second line moves. It's not actually a bad line. It does indicate that whatever is going on, however difficult people are, we're going to be able to manage the situation. It may be we can just ignore the situation, or we can just be aware of the situation and just recognize that right now we can't do a great deal about it. And because we have a second line, because we have this second line moving, that does mean that we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram it moves to is opposition, number 38. And maybe this is telling us that however hard we try, we are not going to be in a position to compromise, change things. We just have to accept that there are some people we just can't deal with, at least in the short term. Maybe until Mercury goes retrograde, goes direct in 3 weeks' time. And we have to just accept that we are different from some other people. And this may also reflect the fact that on Thursday, Friday, we had this total eclipse of the moon when the sun was opposition the moon. And over the weekend, we're thinking about this opposition, and it's becomes very real. And we may just be aware of that sense of separation. If we are different from certain people, if we have different priorities, then that's just the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it. And we may just feel that we just have to accept the situation in the short term, and we don't want to be undermined by getting too close to people who we fundamentally don't have any connection with. At least in the short term, we don't have any connection with them. And that's the I Ching. Sorry, it's a little bit negative, but I do think it sort of reflects the broad astrological picture. And it's not a bad I Ching. It's not saying that anything disastrous is going to happen. And maybe that's also a reminder that on Saturday the moon is trine Jupiter. And that will provide a certain amount of protection in the midst of opposition. And let's now turn to the astrology. And this weekend, Mercury goes retrograde, stationary retrograde. And here is the chart for that stationary moon. By the way, top right, that is not the moon. That is a picture of Mercury. And it's a reminder that Mercury is quite a dry place. It's just a rock, very close to the sun. I think one half of it is boiling hot, the other half worse than boiling hot. The other part is completely freezing. And so here is the chart for the precise moment that Mercury goes retrograde. So I make it, that's March 15th, Saturday, 6:46 a.m. London time. So that means it will go retrograde because the clocks have gone forward in America but not in Europe. That means it will be 2:46 New York time, or 11:46 on Friday evening on the West Coast, and even earlier in Hawaii or Alaska. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then I suppose late afternoon, early evening, Mercury will go retrograde. That's on Saturday. So, is it a big deal, Mercury going retrograde? It's something that does happen a lot, and I often wonder whether Mercury retrograde affects people into astrology more than others. If one wonders, if one did statistics on Mercury retrograde, would one find anything? My guess is no. But still, it has meaning, and we can expect Mercury retrograde to be a time, that 3-week period when things just don't turn out as expected. Again, maybe especially if we're astrologers, with the perception of astrologers. And so we need to be careful about our plans, how we make our plans, and we probably should not be making firm commitments. I don't think that's a good idea, because circumstances might change. Mercury in Aries retrograde, that can represent someone being very decisive, spur of a moment. I'm going to decide to do this, but it's Aries. Things change. Maybe not. Tomorrow's another day. And so we should avoid making commitments, and we should avoid making promises. And if other people are making commitments and promises, then we should take it with a pinch of salt. And we should not try to force people to make commitments or to agree to things or to sign on a dotted line, because things can change. So that's one feature of this Mercury going retrograde. And I should also point out that this Mercury retrograde takes place sort of London time, 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. There was a full moon eclipse 24 hours before. So when you've got a lunation and Mercury going retrograde or direct and very close to each other, that can be quite important. It's like globally there's a change in the energy. There's been a change in the lunation cycle, full moon. There's been a change in Mercury. Mercury has suddenly come to a standstill from the Earth's perspective. Don't forget that. heliocentrically, Mercury never goes backwards. It just seems to go backwards from the viewpoint of the Earth. But having a lunation and Mercury stationary so close to one another, that could have an impact on the markets. Absolutely. I'm not saying it will. And it can have an impact on people's perceptions, on the way they feel. It may just be a feeling that things really are changing, because two things are changing at once. Now, looking at this Mercury retrograde specifically, what is it actually about? What's special about this Mercury retrograde? Well, it's in Aries, we know that. And I've just said that we have to be careful about being too impulsive in making decisions, making promises, and we shouldn't expect other people necessarily to stick to their promises. And as far as aspects are concerned, Mercury is going retrograde at 9:35 Aries. So that means that it goes retrograde fairly close to a semi-square of Uranus, 36 minutes apart. Okay, it's not exact, but there is a Mercury semi-square Uranus feel to that retrograde, to this retrograde. And so Mercury semi-square Uranus, this retrograde could be about shock, sudden realizations. It's a very Uranus feel to this station. And so things can happen which we really were not expecting. At least that's might be how it feels. Also, just after Mercury goes retrograde, the day after, the moon goes into the Via Combusta. Via Combusta, between 15 Libra, 15 Scorpio, that part of the sky can be about things happening that we really hadn't planned for. So there is a certain amount of instability there. But there's something else going on with this Mercury retrograde, which maybe not everyone has noticed. And if we look at the hypothetical planets, and let's turn on the hypothetical planets. We're going to give ourselves a very cluttered chart. Sorry about this, but let's turn on the hypothetical planets. Now, the hypothetical planet that I'm particularly interested in is Cupido. Cupido was the first hypothetical planet that Alfred Witte discovered, if that's the right word, when he was trying to work out the timing of Russian artillery barrages on the Eastern Front in the First World War, not the Second World War, the First World War. And so it's a strange planet because it was originally discovered because someone was trying to work out artillery barrages, but it has become a planet of love and unity and union. It's kind of similar to Venus, and if you look at the glyph of Cupido here, you will see that it's kind of Jupiter and Venus connected. So at that precise moment when Mercury goes retrograde at 9:35 Aries, Cupido is at 9:35 Capricorn. So there is actually a very Cupido feel to this Mercury going stationary direct. And that means that this Mercury going stationary direct, and remember it's quite close to Venus. And so Mercury conjunct Venus, square Cupido. This Mercury direct may have a special connection with relationships. And we can see relationships at all levels. We can see them at the personal level, your relationship, and how those relationships are managed. And it is about that quest for unity, for union, being with someone. But it is a square, and one wants to be close to someone, but it's tough because it's a square to Cupido. Although I should say that in the Uranian school and in the midpoint schools, a square and square, conjunction, opposition, semi-square, social quadrant are all regarded as the same aspect. Maybe it's not about there being a square, it's just there is a dynamic link between Mercury and Cupido. And it may not matter the fact that Mercury is retrograde. The point is Mercury has come to a standstill at a point where it is square Cupido. And so maybe if we want to use Mercury going stationary direct, we should be using it for relationships. We should be using it to making a special effort to really get close to people. It may not be easy, but we should be looking at what our common ground is, what we do have in common, because that's something we can work with, especially as Mercury is conjunct the Venus as well. So, when I was doing my forecast of the 12 signs, I was a little bit negative about Mercury in retrograde and relationships, but maybe there is a positive message here that it is a time for creating unions, and the Mercury Cupido principle would be about perhaps making those unions through what we say. And I suppose while I'm at it, I should be considering what Alfred Witte says. So Alfred Witte, in his Rules for Planetary Pictures, he goes through all the pairs, and I'll just tell you what he says about the principle of Mercury Cupido. So he says, marriage thoughts, artistic considerations, speech, music, and social conversation. So, I don't know, it could be about marriage, but it can also be about art. I mean, that's not surprising. That Jupiter-Venus relationship with Cupido being a mixture of Jupiter and Venus, and conversation. But also, when we think about marriage, a marriage represents a union and people coming together. And of course, this may be working at a global diplomatic level. When you think about all the talks between Russia and the United States, I'm not convinced it's going to go anywhere, but still, you can imagine with Mercury square Cupido around the world, people are trying to broker peace treaties, people are trying to talk with one another, trying to broker deals, and that might be a good way to use the weekend to broker deals with Mercury square Cupido. May not be easy, but we need to try our hardest. One other thing, of course, about Cupido is that it was originally discovered in the context of artillery barrages, so it may have a completely different meaning. And Mercury square Cupido could be news of artillery barrages. I mean, not necessarily literally, news of explosions, enemy action. That is another view of Mercury square Cupido. Now, as far as who might be influenced by Mercury going stationary direct, I mean, you have to remember that. Stationary retrograde. You have to remember that Mercury is coming to a standstill. So what that means is that a particular degree of the zodiac is being highlighted, and so when Mercury comes to a standstill, it's starting to act like an outer planet. We don't normally worry about a Mercury transit because Mercury moves so quickly, but now Mercury is the slowest of all the planets, even slower than Pluto, and so it's almost, you could argue, working like Pluto or Neptune or Saturn, and so who gets hit by it? And looking at a few people who some of them I don't really know much about it. The governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. You can see that she has got her ascendant at 852 Aries. So that means that she's got Mercury going stationary direct on her ascendant, and Cupido is square her ascendant. So perhaps in a politician's chart, this might be a time when they feel they have to proceed with their agenda. She was one of the candidates for, one of the possibilities to take over for Joe Biden, but of course they went for Kamala Harris. I think anyone would have been better than Kamala Harris, including Gretchen Whitmer, but she did make that mistake with the Doritos, which kind of caused her some lasting political damage. But she's got Mercury on her ascendant, so with that square to Cupido, so that might be a time where she feels she needs to do something to advance her political career. And another politician who is impacted by Mercury going stationary direct is Javier Milei. So Javier Milei has his midheaven at 10 degrees 10 Aries. So he has Mercury going stationary direct on his midheaven. If you look at his midheaven, he's actually got Uranus exactly on his IC. So that Mercury going direct is right on his ascendant, right on his midheaven, and is right opposition his Uranus. So for a politician, someone like Javier Milei, president of Argentina, he likes to be controversial. He likes to say stuff. And so Mercury on his midheaven, there's a lot he's going to want to say, but he has to bear in mind he's got Uranus on the IC. He has a lot of enemies. I mean, a lot of the people from Argentina's Peronist past, perhaps had jobs with the government, lost their jobs because he's done this great slashing, hasn't he, of government expenditure with his chainsaw, and so he may be impacted by having Mercury on his midheaven and opposition his Uranus. And then we have Klaus Schwab of World Economic Forum fame. So here is Klaus Schwab. He was born on March 30th, 1938. So he's got a birthday coming up. So he is going to be, how old is he going to be? Born in 1938. So he's coming up to his 87th birthday. And Klaus Schwab has his sun at 9 degrees 5 Aries. He's also got his Saturn. He's got a Sun-Saturn conjunction. So this is Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum, trying to control us, perhaps, with that Sun conjunct Saturn. That's how he's using his Sun conjunct Saturn. It's kind of interesting conjunction, that, because the Saturn is fallen in Aries, but it's conjunct the Sun, so he somehow seems to be able to use that Sun conjunct Saturn. It may be a real part of who he is. And so with Mercury going stationary retrograde on his Sun-Saturn conjunction, this may say something about his life. He needs to be careful how he goes. I mean, he's in his late 80s. He doesn't want to slip, or he has to be careful there. But it may be something about the world he sees. I mean, if he's keeping in touch with the world and his globalist agenda, and this is what he gave to the world, and so with Mercury going stationary direct, that might give him pause for thought. So that's someone who could well be influenced by Mercury going stationary retrograde. I don't know what Piers Morgan is up to. Piers Morgan, that's interesting. Piers Morgan born on March the 30th, and Klaus Schwab also born on March the 30th. So Piers Morgan shares a birthday with Klaus Schwab, and Piers Morgan has his Sun in Aries. I think he's a very Sun in Aries person, Piers Morgan. He likes to be very clear about his opinions, and so he has Mercury going stationing on his Sun, and he's got, if you look at his Sun, his Sun is actually square Black Moon Lilith. So there is a certain sort of unpleasantness there. And so that Mercury is on his Sun. He's got Cupido square that Sun. So that really does emphasize his Sun in Aries square Black Moon Lilith. And with Cupido, who knows what he's doing? Maybe he's trying to do deal. Maybe it has something to do with his career and his broadcasting career, trying to do a deal with some companies, something like that, for his career. So that might be something that he's currently involved with. So he might be someone to watch. Although the activities he's involved with, we might know nothing about it. And continuing on a UK theme, the politician Priti Patel. We haven't heard so much of Priti Patel, so she was very much sort of on the right of the Conservative Party. She kept her seat. A lot of Conservative MPs lost their seats, and of course we've got complete chaos on the right at the moment. I mean, now that even the Reform Party seems to be at war with each other, and Nigel Farage seems to be messing things up, and so people had kind of written off the Conservative Party. Maybe we shouldn't write off the Conservative Party, but she is a leading right-winger in the Conservative Party, and she was born on March the 29th, and she has got her sun at 8 degrees 52 Aries. So she's got Mercury going stationary retrograde on her sun, and so that might push her into the limelight, especially as Cupido is involved. So maybe she might be starting to think about her political career again, and especially with the problems in the Reform Party, and so she may feel she has a chance to start to sort of go for the limelight again. And finally, I wanted to look at the horoscope of Tucker Carlson. So here is the horoscope of Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has got his midheaven at 9 degrees 19 Aries. So he's got Mercury going stationary retrograde on his midheaven. Cupido is square his midheaven. So, when we talked about Piers Morgan, what is he doing with his journalistic career? So what's Tucker Carlson going to do? Maybe Tucker Carlson is planning on doing something to really improve his profile. Maybe he needs to go to Russia again. I was thinking it would be an interesting thing for Tucker Carlson to do something in Kursk. He could go to Kursk, because now that the Russians have liberated Kursk, and maybe the Russians might want to show off some of the war crimes that Ukraine has committed in Kursk. It seems that Ukraine has committed considerable war crimes in Kursk, but just getting news about it. It's not, one says, oh, it's just Russia making it up. But it seems likely that the Ukrainian army has really been guilty of major atrocities in the Kursk region. If Russia was clever, they might want to get Tucker Carlson to visit it and do a documentary and interview some of the victims. Perhaps that might be an idea. But anyway, that's just me thinking aloud. But the point is that Tucker Carlson has Uranus going stationary direct on his midheaven. So this might be some way in which he can increase his profile even more, even though Mercury is going retrograde. And one thinks Mercury retrograde is difficult and Mercury direct is good. But the point is, Mercury is just the planet of communication. It's come to a standstill, and it's right on his midheaven. And that's it. That's all I want to say on Mercury retrograde. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.